It was meant to be a routine town hall, the kind of carefully planned and professionally managed event that dotted Jasmine Crockett's calendar with comforting regularity. The type where the questions were moderated, the speeches rehearsed, and the audience full of polite applause and respectful nods, but on that particular evening, nothing unfolded according to the political script. The room, a high school auditorium turned civic forum, was packed wall to wall with local voters, journalists, staffers, and volunteers, all buzzing with the usual mix of support and curiosity. Jasmine had been on a winning streak, both in legislative influence and public charisma, her fierce debates on Capitol Hill having gone viral more than once, earning her a reputation as one of the few willing to speak plainly in an arena clouded by doublespeak and faux civility. She had grown used to hard questions, to pushback, to condescension disguised as inquiry. But when the reporter from the national outlet, some puffed-up correspondent named Caldwell Pierce, took the mic, the air in the room shifted almost palpably. Dressed in a designer blazer and armed with a smug expression that seemed tailor-made for a debate stage rather than a journalist's seat, Pierce began with what sounded like a question, but felt more like a prelude to a trap. "Congresswoman," he said, voice smooth and oozing self-importance, "how do you reconcile your calls for transparency and accountability with the fact that your recent campaign received contributions from sources you've openly criticized?" In the past, there were murmurs in the audience. The question wasn't new, variations of it had been flung at her before, usually by right-leaning commentators who cherry-picked donor records without context, but it was the tone, not the topic, that sparked the initial flicker of tension. Jasmine blinked, offered a tight smile, and replied with her usual poise, explaining how legislative advocacy often involved navigating imperfect systems, how taking a contribution didn't mean one was beholden, and how her voting record remained consistent. But Pierce didn't stop there. He interrupted. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Its time louder, more aggressive. Each time leaning forward with the gleam of a man who wasn't interested in an answer, but in cornering someone for a headline. "So you're saying your values are for sale?" he asked, smugly folding his arms. Gasps rippled through the audience. Jasmine paused, visibly stunned by the gall, but then something in her shifted not to anger, but to an assertive calm that settled over her like a storm preparing to strike. "I'm saying," she began slowly, "that if you're going to accuse a sitting congresswoman of hypocrisy in front of her constituents, you better come with more than recycled talking points and clickbait assumptions." The audience erupted in applause, but Pierce wasn't finished. He rose from his chair, breaking every protocol agreed upon beforehand, and began pacing the stage beside her, trying to dominate the space with his presence. "I think the American people deserve to know if their elected officials are genuine, or just another brand in the marketplace," he said, practically sneering. That was the last straw. Jasmine turned, faced him squarely, and without raising her voice, delivered the words that would echo across the country within hours. "This stage is for public service, not ego theater. If you want a soapbox, find another show. You're done here." Then, in a move that stunned even her aides, she physically gestured to security to escort him off. There was no screaming, no chaos, just swift, unapologetic action. Pierce sputtered, in protest, invoking freedom of the press and transparency, but the audience wasn't buying it anymore. They had seen what he was doing. This wasn't journalism. It was ambush. As he was removed from the stage, Jasmine returned to her spot, adjusted the mic, and continued as if nothing had happened. The next question came from a high school student, asking about student loan debt, and she answered it with the same intensity and sincerity as if the previous confrontation had never occurred. But it had, and within an hour, clips of the incident flooded the internet. Some framed her as unhinged, anti-press, authoritarian, but far more celebrated her as a woman who had simply refused to be steamrolled by a man who thought confidence equaled credentials. Op-eds were written, panels debated, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Crockett claps back trended within 24 hours, followed by hashtag stage is hers and hashtag ego theater. But what no one outside that room seemed to grasp, no matter how many times they rewatched the footage, was the remarkable restraint she had shown. Because if it had been anyone else, someone less composed, less prepared, that moment might have devolved into shouting and scandal. But Jasmine, with every syllable, had turned the trap into a triumph. And the more the media tried to reframe the moment, the more the public saw through the spin. She didn't silence a reporter, she reclaimed her platform. And in doing so, she lit a fire under a movement of people, particularly women and people of color, tired of being interrogated instead of interviewed, tired of being challenged for sport rather than truth. That moment wasn't about just one confrontation. It became a symbol for every time someone stood up to condescension. Every time someone refused to be spoken over. Every time someone said, enough.